I'm Kurt Othmer here from EEG Info, sitting with my dad, Siegfried Othmer, and I want to interview Siegfried about the book that he wrote. I actually remember you starting this book back when Brian first passed away when I was in high school, and you spent a summer writing in Montana, and I actually went and got to spend a little bit of time while you were there writing, and I got to hang out a little bit and goof around in Montana while I was still a kid. And I remember you working away on that book, and now, 20 years later, this book came to fruition, and one thing I'm really excited about is we actually got to turn it into an audiobook. And the audiobook features your voice and my voice. I get to play Brian. And a bunch of people here from the office got to play some of the police officers and characters in the story. And Sue's voice is in it, my mom's voice. And a few other people, some guest actors in the audiobook. It was a really wonderful experience. Tell me a little bit about how it was, how that impacted you to write this book and to finally finish it.
Well, interesting. The fact is that most of the book was, in fact, written many years ago. And now the story has just continued. And whereas we're obviously steeped into this because it's our family story, the fact is it's a much bigger story than that. It is, in fact, the story of what's coming down with regard to mental health. We're at the threshold of a major revolution in our understanding of the underpinnings of mental health problems, and in particular, finding our way to a solution. And this is all new, and we had our chance at discovering this some 30 years ago when our son first had difficulties with behavior that really did not respond to any of the ordinary interventions. We eventually found our way to neurofeedback, and that turned out to turn his life around. And since then, we realized what was happening to him was so compelling that it got us, to my wife and me, to change careers in order to commit ourselves to bringing this technique to greater awareness in the world, greater visibility, and greater penetration into the mental health community. Personally, of course, this was very impactful for us because ultimately Brian did succumb to his epilepsy some years later. But he had 6 good years of life with neurofeedback. And in this book, we get an insight of how an adolescent deals with these profound problems of a dysfunctional brain. And it's just a rare gift to have that insight, which he gave us through his diary, which of course we knew nothing about until he died, and then he had left it to us. So it's a powerful story, and I just add some color commentary, my view of what I think is going on, and then provide the context of what has happened before or since with the neurofeedback technique. It's now been 25 years since Brian passed away, and over that time, a lot has happened in this field. It's spreading worldwide. It is being implemented in many different ways, and we're still very much in the midst of the developmental thrust of this technique.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up with Brian, 7 years older than me, and a complete, workout fanatic and out of control with his military gear and his knives and his complete out of control rages. And it was exciting. I think I learned a lot about people. I think I learned a lot how to deal with humans and humanity by being super hyper vigilant. I meet a lot of nurses who all point to someone in their past who has kept them a little more aware of the people around them. And there's no question that growing up with somebody like that has its effects. And it had effects for all of us.
Right.
You two had to actually raise him. I just had to stay safe.
So when we now look at nurses, we realize they act a little differently by virtue of that experience. Sure. And so, of course, experience shapes the brain. And now we realize that technique is available to us more generally to go in and shape the brain, allow the brain to shape itself to better, to improve behavior. And this is true across the board. It's interesting, your own history, you saw this in a very challenging way, being 7 years younger, and you had to learn the survival skill.
I had to learn to stay close to grown-ups.
Yeah.
Is what I had to learn.
Right, they kept you safe.
Yeah.
But of course, the grown-ups weren't always around, so there are
This is
times.
very small windows, you know? The window between the school bus, and the house. Like those very small windows of extreme danger.
The problem, of course, was that Brian, in those early years, did not know how to relate well to other people, and so the world was mysterious to him, and the world paid a price. We paid a price. Kurt paid a price, and he had to develop his own set of defenses, survival skills, and well, clearly he managed. So anyway, here we are, and it's a very different world. It's just, you know, we're sorry that Brian wasn't here to appreciate what he unleashed, but through his life, we were in fact very well instructed about the path we needed to take in order to bring this technique to broader awareness and utilization within the world.
So tell me a little bit more about Brian's legacy. Tell me more about the book.
Well, what I wrote, 20 years ago was, of course, mainly Brian's upbringing and the immediacy of what we went through during his years of growing up and our eventual discovery of neurofeedback. Discovery in the sense that we heard about it. We didn't discover the technique. But as it happens, it was discovered right in our neighborhood here in Los Angeles, only a few miles from where we lived. And so that was fortuitous. And it was not yet well known. It was still being researched here by a UCLA psychologist. And the world really didn't know about it. And we were able to take advantage at that early date and then begin to get involved. And then in the later years, what I added to the book later was, of course, some reflections on the developments since that time, since those early days, which have been numerous and profound. It's allowed us to understand the brain function from the user's perspective. We have here a very powerful tool of allowing the brain to engage with itself and improve its own skills of self-regulation. And that turns out to be what the world really needs, not only with respect to mental health, but with respect to brain function generally. The plain fact is that none of us can know what our brain is capable of until it is trained.
I love that.
Now, when you think about that, it seems obviously true. You could ask me, how's your golf game? And I said, well, actually, I don't play golf. So I wouldn't have anything meaningful to say. So that's a skill, a learned skill. But the fact is, it's true, when you learn how to play golf, it's really the brain that gets trained. And so it's a specific way for training the brain.
I was just listening to this TED Talk, it was NPR's take on TED Talks, and they were doing this thing about champions. And they were talking about these runners and the world's fastest runners. And they played a little beep sound to indicate how short today's fastest runner is from fastest runners in the past. And it's just, it's that different. Like the distance of the fastest runner today, Usain Bolt, and the previous record holder is that different. And so that sort of shows that there's sort of these physiological limits. And how close can you get to those physiological limits? You don't know until you train. Train either physiologically or train mentally and get your brain better on track. But what I love about this is that it's you're seeing your own brain activity, and you're training yourself. It's not something being done to you.
Yeah, and in Brian's case, it was also an act of empowerment for him. As soon as he realized this door was open to him, that he could train his own brain to his own betterment, that whole world opened up. Until that moment, his world was one of needing to take his medications, needing to follow rules, needing to take care of himself with sleep and everything else. It was a command performance, and he yielded to that because he knew he had to. But with the biofeedback, the neurofeedback, all of a sudden this door opened. It says, oh, here's something I can do for myself.
Well, I really thank you for sharing this book with the world, and I invite you all into the story of my family and into our story of how my parents got involved in this and how I became involved in this. And really, it's a beautiful look at this young man's experience finding his way in the world, and especially for a lot of parents with children on the spectrum who don't know what's going on in that brain. What is his perspective? He left this journal that really gives you an amazing insight into his life and his experience, and then Siegfried writes around that. And so I want to thank you very much, Dr. Siegfried Othmer, my dad, for joining me here and sharing about this book. And one final plug on this audiobook, because I think it's the right way to listen to it. It is an amazing experience, and the audiobook gives you a little insight that you don't get from the print book, having that emotional experience. That's really wonderful to listen to. So thank you very much.